Howdy, folks. Today I want to talk about suicide ideation, suicidal thoughts. I had a therapist once tell me that thinking about suicide ideation, suicidal thoughts was just your brain's way of trying to help you when you're in what seems to be an impossible situation. And that kind of took the teeth out of the ideation because if you can recognize that there are contributing factors to the feeling of an impossible situation and know that the situation isn't truly impossible, then the suicidal thoughts are just awful daydreams, awful imaginings. They're not something you actually have to act on. But I always thought that the suicide ideation would go away. I thought that the more I knew about it, the more therapy I did, the more work I did on myself, the more I improved my mental health, eventually the suicide thoughts would just go away. Hasn't happened yet. Been going on for a long time and recently have been getting more creative, which I am not impressed with. Before we go any further, I don't know what exact kind of warning I should put here, but I'm going to talk about suicide. I'm going to talk about suicidal ideation, and I am going to give examples. I will not leave you hopeless. I am not going to encourage you to suicide. In fact, my intent is to do the exact opposite. My intent here is to break the taboo on talking about, hey, I had thoughts of killing myself. We should be able to talk about that. You should be able to talk about that. Once you do that, once you get it out into the light, like I've said before, once you expose your demons to the light, it takes the teeth out of them. My intent is to save lives. If you're in a space or a place where you don't want to talk about suicidal thoughts, you don't want to hear about suicidal thoughts, hit stop. Don't watch the video. Maybe another time. No judgment. Peace to you. I wish you the best. Remember, hope is a choice, and you're not alone. Other people have struggles similar to yours, and there are groups around that can help. All right, suicide ideation. My first suicidal thought was sometime in college during a time where I felt down and alone and that there was no way things were going to get better. At the time, those thoughts were very simple, very straightforward. I want to die. There was nothing in that time that was a voice saying you should kill yourself, and there was no imagining of ways in which I might die. At that time, young kid, I knew suicide was wrong. I felt ashamed to have those thoughts. Where did those thoughts come from? It felt like a sin. I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't until they had been going on, off and on, for 4 or 5 years. So I was out of college and in the military, where I told my mom about them one night on a phone call. She said she was sorry that I was having them. She expressed compassion and sympathy, and then also told me that it's okay to have those thoughts. It's not a sin. You're not the only one to have those thoughts. At that time, she shared that one of my siblings had had them too, and that she had them off and on, and I was not alone. And I think that was a key bit of information that I've held as my suicide ideation has progressed. I didn't have many suicidal thoughts while I was on active duty as a young adult. I was a little too busy to bother with a whole lot of anything other than what was the next bit of training, what was the next bit of duty I had to do, where was I going, what was the next deployment, what did I have to train on, what did I have to get ready for. The next time I encountered anything like suicide ideation was on my last deployment to Iraq in 2007. We were there for a year, and what I noticed was toward the end, in addition to not feeling any emotion anymore, just being like a robot, I also had a longing to just die. I just hoped something would happen in the war zone, put me out of my misery, and it would all be over. It was an overall feeling and wish instead of a specific instance of an acute thought. There was one night, right at the end of our deployment, my replacement was there, and I was just waiting to get on the flight out, and I was standing around in Tent City with one of my friends. He was smoking some cigarettes and I was chewing tobacco, and we were complaining. And we started to hear bullets whiz over our head, just like pissed off hornets, just zoop, zoop, zoop. Couldn't hear the shots, they were too far away. I looked at my friend Brad and I said, maybe I ought to just climb up in the back of the pickup here and stand up and see if one of those will catch me in the head. He kind of chuckled and said, yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it? Pretty macabre, I admit, but I guarantee I'm not the only one that's had a thought like that. So after I got out of the military, there several years elapsed before I actually got diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and started learning that mental health was a thing. And I don't remember much in the way of suicidal thoughts during that time. I remember lots of emotional pain, anguish inside of me. There was lots of anger. I've talked about anger before. And off and on, like a feeling of just wanting out or wanting to die, but nothing specific. They were infrequent enough that I wasn't worried. And then in 2017, after a highly stressful situation at work with a boss who'd backed me into a corner, I was just driving in my assigned vehicle to go do my assigned task. Out of the blue, pops into my head, just kill yourself. I said no. And this voice was far more active and present than any suicidal thought had ever been. And it continued, and it said things like, just take the razor blade in your pocket, that box cutter. You just put a new blade in it and slash your jugular. Just vertical, real quick, a whole bunch of them, both sides. You can take the pain. It won't hurt a whole lot because it's a brand new blade. And if you do that, no one can save you. You'll bleed out fast enough and this will all be over. And that scared the hell out of me. And I said no to the voice. I said, absolutely not. I am not doing that. And the voice didn't shut up. It was persistent. It kept talking to me. And it kept talking to me for hours. And I had to fight it for hours. On the drive home from work that day, it said things like, speed up to about 90. Your pickup will do 90, no problem. And ram into that bridge abutment that's coming up. There's no one behind you. There's no one around you. You won't hurt anyone else. You'll just kill yourself. Take your seatbelt off. I said no. Again and again and again, I said no. And that night when I got home, I was shaking, scared out of my wits. I went in the house and I told my wife what was going on. I called the suicide hotline, was able to talk to someone that knew what to do. It helped me through some steps, not being by myself, staying with my family. And the person on the hotline also set me up with a callback the next day from the VA to get me in and get me assessed. That was the first time suicide ideation had taken a very aggressive, personal approach. As I progressed through the mental health system at the VA and did my intake and got assigned to a therapist and talked to a psychologist, got medications to help take the edge off, and eventually made it through diagnosis, the intensity of the suicide thoughts lessened, but came pretty frequently, far more frequently than any other time in my life. It ebbed and flowed, but there were definitely extended periods of time where they came every day, multiple times a day. As I made progress working on my mental health, the frequency of the suicide thoughts lessened. At some point during that process of about 6 years, I thought, surely I can do enough work, I can heal enough, I can fix myself enough that these suicidal thoughts will go away. It was also during that time, like I said at the beginning of the video, I had a therapist say to me that suicidal thoughts were just your brain's way of finding a solution when it seemed like there was no solution. And that usually your brain did that because there were other contributing factors to the situation, that once those contributing factors were handled or fixed, your brain would stop the suicide thoughts. And from my experience, that has been true. To this day, I remind myself that, okay, my brain's having suicidal thoughts. That's because something about this situation is impossible. I know that no situation is impossible. Okay, what is making this situation seem impossible? What can I do to get to the other side where the situation is no longer impossible? And that helps. It's a lot of work, but that helps. And then I wrote a book about my mental health journey called Hope is a Choice. I'll put a link for that down in the description if you're interested. Writing seemed to heal a lot of things all at once. Putting things down on paper helped, and suicidal thoughts slid into the background and seemed to happen only in moments of great stress, which happens in life, and I was prepared for based on my therapy and my learning and new understanding. But I had another assumption or wish about suicide ideation, that if I continued to work on my mental health, it was going to be for the rest of my life, but that was fine. That they may not completely go away, but they would not get any worse, not get any more creative. It would be the same old thing that I would just have to deal with that I had always dealt with. I could handle that. Well, that assumption has proved false. Just 3 days ago, the insistent, very present, very forceful voice said, "This is too much. Go get in your truck and find something hard to ram into. Don't wear your seatbelt again." Now, I've had this thought process before. The thing that was different about this one is I wanted to listen to the voice. In the past, I have not wanted to listen to the suicide voice. I am not real impressed with this most recent development. For me, that indicates a loss of agency, a loss of control of myself. If it's just a voice yammering at me and I can yell back at it no, then to some degree I feel in control and secure. But if I'm at a point where I want to listen to it, I don't know what that means. All I want to do is talk about it because I am positive that I am not the only one. And if this sounds familiar, you're not the only one either. And I know from past experience with the suicide ideation and with other aspects of mental health that it will be okay. This is not an impossible situation. I don't know what the answer is, how to get out of this, or what it means yet, but I know that there is an answer. It is possible to get out of this, and that I will survive. I'm going to stay, and I want you to stay too. So if you feel like sharing your experience with suicide ideation with me and the wider world, go ahead and leave a comment. I will read, I will listen. Please know that there is no shame in suicide ideation. It is not a sin. You are not weak. Suicide is a disease. It's like a sickness. There is something affecting you, like catching a cold or a flu. It's very serious, but there's hope. It will not last forever. Perhaps most importantly, there will be an end to this session of the sickness. You might catch another suicide ideation cold, and that one too will pass. Again, feel free to hit me up down in the comments. Remember, hope is a choice.